Someone I know recently got a genetic test that was really interesting. Her mom and grandma both had Alzheimer's disease, and she has lived her whole life terrified that she would be the next in line. But she just learned that she has a genetic combination that may reduce her risk. When I found out, I was so excited to hear that because I know what it's like to live on the other side of the coin as someone who is genetically destined to develop early onset Alzheimer's disease. Most people don't realize that there are different types of genetic risk for Alzheimer's, and knowing the difference might matter for you or for someone that you love. So I want to talk a little bit about it. When I tell people about my genetic status, they usually assume I'm talking about ApoE4. That's the genetic variant that you often hear about in the news. But that's not what I have. I carry a rare genetic mutation that virtually guarantees I'll develop Alzheimer's disease around the same age my dad did. These are called familial Alzheimer's genetic mutations. Think of them as certainty genes. If you have them, you'll almost definitely get the disease. But ApoE4, the one that we often hear about in the news, is different. It's a risk gene and not a certainty gene. And that's good news for most people because carrying a risk gene only means that your risk is impacted, not necessarily that you're certainly going to develop Alzheimer's. Here's how ApoE works. I promise I'll keep this simple. So everyone inherits two copies of the ApoE gene, one from each parent. Each copy comes in one of three flavors. First, there's ApoE2. That is a protective version, but only 2 or 3% of people have that one. It reduces your Alzheimer's risk by about 40 to 50%. So that's the good one. Then there's ApoE3. This is the neutral version. This is the most common. About 80% of people have at least one of these, and it doesn't increase your risk or decrease it. It's just neutral. And finally, there's ApoE4. This is the risk version. About 20 to 25% of people have at least one of these, so it's relatively common. Now, if you inherit one copy of ApoE4, your risk goes up 2 to 4x compared with someone who has the neutral variation. And that sounds scary, but remember, it's a risk increase, not a guarantee. About 2% of people, so pretty rare, inherit two copies of ApoE4, one from each parent. That's where the risk really gets significant. It's up to 10 to 12 times higher than the baseline, with about a 60% chance of developing Alzheimer's by age 85. Now, about 2% of the population carries that. They call it the homozygous 4-4. About 2% of the population has two copies of the ApoE4 gene, and they represent about 15% of all Alzheimer's cases because of the increased risk that they have. So back to the person I'm telling you about, she learned that she has one ApoE4, which would normally increase her risk by 2 to 4 times. Okay. But she also carries one ApoE2, the protective one. And the research suggests that these can essentially cancel each other out or significantly reduce the impact of the ApoE4. After she watched her mom and her grandma go through this disease, she spent her lifetime fearing that she would follow in their footsteps. She finally has reason for hope, and her genetic testing provided relief. For me, genetic testing confirmed my worst fear. Same test, completely different outcomes. The key difference between what I have and what most people worry about is that familial Alzheimer's disease mutations like mine aren't just risk genes. They're cause genes. Some people call them deterministic. And without medical intervention, they cause Alzheimer's in nearly everyone who carries them. But ApoE variants are just risk modifiers. They change your odds, but they don't necessarily determine your fate. One of the most important things I want you to know is that genetics aren't the destiny for most people. Researchers estimate that about 45% of dementia cases are potentially preventable through lifestyle factors. Whether you have ApoE4 or not, there are things that you can do. And I'll dive into some of those risk factors in another video. If you're wondering about your own genetic risk, you can talk to your doctor, you can talk to a genetic counselor, and they can help you understand whether it makes sense for your situation to undergo testing and, of course, how to interpret the results if you do. If you've got questions about genetic testing, it's something that I've been through, so I'm happy to share my experience and what I've learned along the way. And if this helped clarify anything for you, please let me know. I love your comments.